All right. Welcome to this session. My name is Kirill, and today we're going to be talking about when and how we can and should build custom process elements. So this talk is fairly technical and concentrates all about low-code platform and all around building our own custom process element. So a little bit about myself. Let me just get the mouse going. A little bit about myself. So I've been in accounting and finance for quite some time, and then about three and a half years ago, I've joined Creatio, and I've been building integrations and other products on the platform for quite some time now. All right, so that's all I wanted to tell you about myself. Now let's quickly cover the agenda for today. So agenda for today will be to build or to follow certain steps to actually achieve a custom process element. And at the end of the day, or at the end of this talk, what I am aspiring to get is the picture that you see on the slide, and where we have our custom process element. We can launch the business process from start to finish, and this thing will do something useful for us. We will also make sure that we can call various components or various logic, various code implemented in multiple places in the system. And hopefully the return or the result, the answer to this call will be exactly the same, no matter how you call it, where you call it from, etc. We will concentrate on building our custom logic for getting foreign exchanges with the help of multiple banks that I have pre-created for us. We will then build some interfaces to expose this logic to the main application. We will then consume that inside our user task, and hopefully we will then convert our user task into a custom process element, so that when you are in the design mode for your in Creatio, you will be able to simply drag it on the screen and use all the familiar flows and conditional flows and other things that you came to love about the business processes inside this palette. All right, so let's just at this point jump immediately to live demo. And what I have for us here is I have a brand new installation. I have installed it on my local machine. This is the latest version, 7.17. Of our product, and I will be using my local environment to configure or to build this task. The tools that I will be using are Visual Studio, maybe a little bit of Visual Studio Code, and most importantly, at some point in this talk, we will be converting our system into development into in-file system mode. At this point, my system is not configured in any way, shape, or form. That's how it comes by standard. So let's get going. So what we want to achieve, here is this. We want to go to, let's say, Studio Workplace. We want to go to Business Process Library. We want to be able to build a new business process. And on the left-hand side, where you see all the elements, I'll just give it a second. Maybe my laptop is a little slow. And here, what I want to see is I want to be able to add my own element. And you saw it's a bank building, so that I can drag it perhaps somewhere here, and then I can do things, useful things. So in order for us to start with this, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to actually create what's called a user task. A user task is a special type of schema that allows us to place things right here on the palette. What you'll see right now is that you have many user tasks, and there are right here. And you can utilize these user tasks just by simply dragging them. The list of available user tasks is available here in the list. And these are all the functions that you can call, and perhaps you may not be familiar with all of them, but they are functions that you can already call and execute. They've been placed there by various developers through various packages or developed by us. So let's, for example, take a random one. It says open message window. On the right-hand side, you see that you have familiar parameters to execute this user task, and this is what we're going to start off with first. We're going to build a user task, and then once our user task performs up to our expectations, we will go and actually create a business process element. Okay, so I'm not going to be starting this, or I'm not going to be saving anything right now. And the first thing that I want to do, because we are going to be developing some C# code, I need to be able to debug my system. Now, we can do various debuggings, but the easiest way is to debug our system when the system is running in the file system mode. So let's go ahead and do that. The first order of business for us is to open the webconfig file. So let's go into a webconfig file. And in here, what we can do is we can find around line 400, I believe 412, file design mode, and we can flip the switch from true to false. Oops, from true, let's put it to false. And around line 480, we're gonna also flip the bit on use static file content. So let me just find this. Use static file content. So there we go. It's line 470, and we just simply change it from false to true. Once you make these changes, there's nothing else for you to do. And now what we need to do is we need to go into our configuration panel, and that would be normally under cogwheel and all the way at the bottom under advanced settings. And in the advanced settings, you will be greeted with the new interface. That's version 7.17. Now the 7.17, this Workplace Explorer, you can also, I've created myself a quick shortcut. So if I'm clicking on this admin button, that's just simply going to open us this panel. There are a couple of other buttons here that we will discuss later in the topic, but for now, this is the setup that I have. So what I want to do here, first of all, is I want to download the entire system into what's called an auto-generated folder. If we take a look at the structure of our, let me just find our folder here. Oops, that's the wrong one. All right, so what we want to do is we want to take a look at the web app folder and then the configuration folder, and then inside auto-generated inside SRC. What you see now, is you've got just the CS stuff, which is great. But what we need, we also need some JavaScript stuff. So let's go ahead and execute the following action. Download packages to file system. Now, if you don't see download packages to file system, that just means that the system has not reloaded yet or has not recognized that we changed something in web config. In order for us to make sure that it does recognize that, just simply refresh the page and open that file one more time. Let's go to admin. Let's go to actions. Maybe I didn't save it in. Let me quickly check why I'm not. Why we're not in the file system mode yet. Where's my 400 line use? File design mode. Interesting. Let me just grab the file I have prepared for myself. Just 1 second. Kind of unexpected a little bit. So I'm going to take from here and I'm going to grab this web config. I already have it pre-configured. And let me just drop it here and replace it. Okay, under actions, we should be able to there we go. So let's download packages to file system right now. So when we do so, a lot of stuff will be generated in this auto-generated folder, and that will allow us to develop directly in our file system. Now, developing in file system also provides additional benefits, such as ability to debug in the Visual Studio, inputting code straight in your Visual Studio, having the debugger IntelliSense, and all these great benefits. So that's all we need to do. We just need to change 2 settings and nothing else. Okay, so now that the system has converted itself into development in file system mode, if I were to navigate to the main interface, I would be told that I need to compile my application for the first time. So I'm going to click and compile the workplace and just give it a moment and wait up. While the compilation is happening, it is recommended that you don't do much. We're using a Studio product here, so I'm not using a full bundle for the purpose of our demonstration. There is nothing There's nothing different between having a studio or having a full bundle. We're developing something that is going to be very basic, so we don't need to depend on packages available in service or sales. And we're simply going to take the smallest application with the smallest footprint. So as you can see, it takes 10-15 seconds and the compilation is completed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that we can actually access the system before we move on with any configurations whatsoever. And it looks that we're working. It looks that everything's loading fine. Let's go somewhere in general. Let's go, let's say, to a contact card, and you could see that there is a contact. I can hopefully open one. Perfect. So everything seemed to be working fine. Let's open the new tab. Let's go in the admin package. And what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be creating a package for ourselves. So normally what you would do is you would click on this plus button and you're going to say that you would want to create a package of some sort. You would give it a name, perhaps a description. And if you're interested in doing SVN, then you would also choose some of the necessary options here. You can also immediately add dependency, and these are kind of nice additions and features of 7.17 Designer. Prior to this version, we would need to first create the package, then go and configure the dependencies. Now the process is streamlined and makes it a little bit easier. But that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to start utilizing what's called a Clio package. A Clio package is a separate type of package that allows us to speed up our development process even further. In order for you to use Clio as your kind of a default package creation, then what we need to do is we need a command line. Now inside the command line, and I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code for my command line. So let's navigate to a folder where I have this application running. So I'm going to go and see, I have it in the net pub, root, accelerate 2020, I believe, _1, Terasoft web app, Terasoft configuration, PKG. All right. Let's take a look at the content, and the content of the directory tells you what is currently listed here in the file system. So you already have some packages, and we're not going to go into details what they are. You can, I'll leave that for self-study for you. But what I want to do is I want to create my own package. So how do I do that? Well, the first thing I need to make sure of is that I have a Clio. Clio is our command line tool that allows us to do things in the file system that otherwise would be very difficult. So here's my Clio program. It allows me many things to do. For example, things like restarting my application, clearing Redis database, registering, unregistering, querying SQL, etc. If you don't know how to install, it's going to be Clio, not Clio, sorry, .NET tool, Clio, .NET tool, install Clio-G, I believe. I already have this tool installed, so what I can do is I can just do a command for update. And in this case, my update is going to connect to the cloud, and it's hosted on the Nougat. So a .NET tool is a special type of a Nougat package that materializes itself on the client as a command line interface, and that's how you can install it. So if you want to install it for the first time, just issue command install. And if you want to update, obviously issue command update. And if you want to remove it, just issue command uninstall, I believe. Okay, so let's clear this up. And in order for us to create a new package, all we have to do is do this: Clio init, that's a short form for create new package, and we have to give it a package name. So we're going to call it accelerate, custom process element. Just make sure that you don't have spelling mistakes. It's going to be a shame to fix it later, and let Clio do its job. Now, we are currently located in the PKG folder where system is expecting to see all these packages. That's why I have navigated to this folder. And once this package creation is done, and there it is, we can now take a look at the content of the directory, and you could see that now there is a new element here. And if we navigate to it and take a look at what's here, you see that it's a solution, it's a project, and there are assemblies, data, properties, resources, etc. So be familiar, for those who are not new in Creatio product. This should not sound familiar. For those of you who are new, the folder structure mimics the types of elements that you can create here. For example, you've got SQL scripts, and SQL scripts will match up to what's stored in SQL scripts. Schemas will go into, obviously, schema folder, etc. Okay, so at this point, we're done with Visual Studio Code, and let's see if we can open that project or solution in the real Visual Studio. Now, I'm not going to be using Visual Studio Code to develop an application. I will be using a normal studio. It's just a little bit easier with building it. So let's go here, Web App, Configuration, PKG, and let's go into right here. Okay, so let's give it a moment for the studio to load up. It's going to open us the package, hopefully. Let's go into Solution Explorer. Let's take a look what's here. So what you've got here is a list of assemblies. That's for when we're importing some external libraries, DLLs, that are .NET framework or .NET Core. They could be .NET Core in a specific way, or they could be just a .NET standard. So whatever the library you're importing and you would like to utilize them, they're going to go into this folder. Data stands for data bindings. If we want to bind some data to the package, it will go into this folder. Resources has to do with localizable strings. Schemas is for all the stuff we create from within the configuration, and SQL scripts stands for scripts that we would like to run at some point in our package. Okay, so let's take a look at one of the most important components here. And one of the important components is going to be this file, descriptor.json. This descriptor JSON tells the system in the next step what this folder structure is all about. So in this particular case, we're specifying that we have an ID, it's just a GUID. We're saying that the package version is 7.8. We've given it a name, and there is a modified UTC Linux timestamp here. We're also very important, make sure that you specify that your maintainer is customer, otherwise you will lock package out of use and you will only be able to use it in the development mode. And then there's something called depends on. Now, I'm not going to be using the interface, the main interface, and let me switch back to the website. So I'm not going to be using this interface to configure dependencies because I want to show you how you can use almost no interface to build your own packages. So how do I know about the structure of what goes into this depends on? Clearly, it's an array. We can see that this is an array of elements. So what kind of elements am I building here? Well, there is another package that we can take a look at. So let me close sources. Let's go back here. And let's take a look at the packages that we already find in this folder. Now, there is one special package in the system that will exist everywhere, and it's called custom. One of the main properties of the custom project is that it depends on everything. It has many dependencies that we can learn from. So let's take a look at this package. So I'm going to go back in the package. I'm going to find my custom, and I'm going to grab a descriptor here. Inside the descriptor, you can see that you've got many things. So you've got depends on a full array of 400 plus lines. You also have a description of custom package, and then pretty much everything else follows what we have in our package. All right, so what do we want to copy from here? Well, the first thing that we probably want to do is grab this. Let's take the description and put it into our own package. And the order of things is not important here. It's just important that the property is there. The next thing I want to grab some depends on properties. So who do I want to depend on? Well, I know that I want to depend on product core. So I'm just going to look for product core. And there's the product core package that exists in the system. I can copy it and I can simply jump back and paste it in here. At this point, my descriptor is completed and I can go into the system and upload that. And I can go into descriptor and I can upload the system. Just one second. Okay, so let's now take a look at how we can load this package. So let's change the description. We're going to change it to custom process element how to. You can provide links here, URLs, whatever you want. Okay, so now that this file is built, we don't really need to touch it anymore. We can close the previous descriptor, and let's make sure that we can build our solution. So I'm going to run the build, Control-Shift-B, and see if I can actually build my thing. So I can see that the build succeeded, and I'll just resave this, resave my solution just for good measure. And now we can move on to our application and see how we can import this package into the app. Okay, so back into the website, what I want to do here and the steps that I want to take are these. I want to go under actions and I want to say update packages from file system. This will go through the content of my file system, find all the directories inside the PKG folder, read the descriptor, and load necessary files. Once the package is loaded into the system, we will be able to develop it in local file system, and yet all the changes would be applied straight here. You can see that the system's telling me that it found some files in the package. It says that it's added, and here's the package that we just created. Now, if we're going to flip here, you're going to see that there's absolutely nothing here, and that's perfectly fine because we haven't added anything just yet. However, we will be adding some components here. Now, before we continue with our development in file system mode, we need to make sure that we instruct the system to actually make all the changes into this package. For that, let's go back into system settings. And in system settings, we're going to look for a couple of properties. The first property that we want to change is the current package ID, or the current package. There's my current package. And in here, instead of using a custom, I want to change it to accelerate custom process element. This setting tells the system that all the changes we're going to be making anywhere shall be recorded into this package and therefore somewhere in my disk, which I can then commit to some version control system, be it SVN or Git or GitLab, whatever it is, and then I can push it and I can give it to you. I can push it to production, whatever the case might be. So this is setting number one. Setting number two that I want to affect is going to be a prefix. Now, the prefix for object name will instruct us I'm sorry, I just got distracted with the question. Prefix for object name will basically instruct the system of the naming convention for everything we do. By default, when you're getting the system for the first time, it's going to say USR, and that's simply to identify that it's the user package. Now, normally, when you're developing for Marketplace, you would want to make sure that this prefix somehow identifies you. So for example, if I'm working for Creatio, maybe my package is going to be CRO or CRI, whatever the case might be. If I'm an independent developer, maybe Krylov, so maybe I'll have a prefix like this. Now, this is just simply to identify who's creating things in the system. But in my case, since I'm the only one developing things here, I will just have no prefix at all. Now, if I save my values as such and I create items with this particular configuration, that means that everything will look like it came from Creatio, which is a good thing and a bad thing. If you're developing a custom package, you should probably consider identifying things that you're building with some sort of a prefix. And you should definitely do that if you're developing for Marketplace. Otherwise, you may not pass some of the QA requirements. Okay, so now that we have done all that, let's go back into our package and let's create our user task. So in here, I'm going to be using the Accelerate Custom Process Element package, and I'm going to click on Add, and I'm going to find a user task that I want to add. Now, adding a user task is nothing, it's not difficult task. All I have to do is I have to specify a code, title, give it a description, and make sure that I just check on the user task. So let's call it business logic. Business logic for now. We're going to create a more comprehensive one a little bit later. For now, I just want to show you the most basic steps. Now, the title, my custom business logic. And in the description, we can write things like what this task is actually going to be doing. For example, provide methods to calculate basic math functions, or you can just leave it blank. Now, these two checks with custom handlers for event and partial, a little bit more advanced topics, and we're going to talk about those if we have time. But in a nutshell, they allow you to take this user task and separate it into multiple files so that you can define things in separate places. It turns out to be more convenient this way when you have a more complex tasks. In fact, some of our tasks, I'll show you where to look at the good examples of how the tasks are implemented. They're actually created as partial. Also, if you want to create some custom event handlers for your task, if you want to do some transitions there, you would need to do this checkbox, and I'll show you later where you can take a look at some of the good examples. Let's apply this. And what we see now is that we have this business logic item already created for us. If you want to go and delete it, by all means, go ahead and delete things. And you can click on the triple dot and you can click on the properties and just kind of see what was created for you. So we see some IDs, some UIDs, that it's business logic, etc., etc. So this is just for information purposes. You can't really change anything here, but it's useful to find out things about IDs. So I see that there is a question. Are there language preferences for developing custom process element? Is there a specific development environment required for creating custom process elements? So the language preferences, just like it applies for the remainder of the system, all backend goes in C#, all front end is in JavaScript. There is no other way around it. Now, you can technically change C# to something else .NET compatible, maybe F# or maybe even Visual Basic. But in that case, you would need to actually build your library that is .NET, that you can run in .NET, and then you can use whatever the language you want. But the default is C# and JavaScript. Is there a particular environment? No, there is no particular environment. Some people use Visual Studio, some people use Writer, some people use other development environments or IDEs as they are more accustomed to. There is absolutely no requirement there. As long as you can build your assembly, you're good to go. My personal preference is to use Visual Studio just because it provides few extra pieces that we may take advantage of. And another thing is I forgot about Clio. Clio is the tool that makes this whole static file content possible. So I would recommend just quickly installing it and using it as a command line interface. It really does not affect if you're using what IDE you're using. That's going to be something that you can even use to maybe for low-code development if you want to restart your site or flush Redis or move packages from production to from pre-production or from development to production or committed to Git. That's Clio is a type of tool that can certainly help you that. And it's a command line, which is great because you can totally automate the whole thing. Okay, so now we've developed this business logic. Hopefully I answered the question. So now let's take a look at this business logic. If I click on it, you will see that I am getting some fairly long, well, not long, but fairly long. I mean, it's 56 lines of code already here, file with some regions here that gives me an option to paste my code. So do I need Visual Studio to do that? Absolutely not. I can go and start writing code here. However, if you if you do make mistakes and you can benefit from IntelliSense and static type checking, then I would recommend opening this file in Visual Studio and inputting your code there. Personally, I wouldn't be able to write more than maybe a line or two of code here without making mistakes. And even then, it's questionable at best. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to essentially tap into what's happening inside this method. So there is a method called internal execute, and this method will be called when we start our user task. Inside this internal execute, you've got context, which allows you to get to the context of your business process. So you can get anything and everything out of the context. You can access any parameters. You can access collections. You can get user connections, things of that nature. But you also have another property called entity, which we'll talk about that later. Let's just keep it a bit mysterious for now. What you need to do at the end is you need to just simply return true. If you are not returning true, or if you're throwing an exception, then the business process will also presume that there is a problem with your process, and it will give you an error. It will not continue to the following element. So make sure that you do not have any exceptions. If you're running code that is unsafe, wrap it in try catch. Otherwise, just well, do your best basically not to have any exceptions here. Now, this return true will allow you to basically tell the system that you are done doing whatever you need to be doing here, and the business process flow can continue to the next element, whatever the next element happens to be. So if it's an arrow to next element, then go there. If it's a conditional, then evaluate condition, etc. If, on the other hand, you change this return to false, that would indicate to a system that you are subscribing to some certain events. And those events are very powerful. For example, you can define your user task and say, well, I would like to do something. And perhaps that something is calling external web service. Now, the external web service perhaps will give you a result, maybe not right away, but maybe in half an hour. You're calling the external service to initialize something, to create something, and it's a really long-running procedure. So what you want to do is you want to say, I will come back here as soon as some event has triggered. In that case, you return false. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this talk for now, but that's certainly possible, and that's how most of the user tasks are implemented when they're developed by us. Okay, so we've done this part, but what I really want to do here is I want to do the most basic example possible. So I'm going to do a parameter input. It's okay to work without parameters, but I want to make sure that I do have some parameters to actually play along, to run my debugger, etc. So let's do a code. So we're going to call it in text, and let's give it a title, in input text. And the type is going to be text. And since we're working with strings, so we're just going to keep it to text. There are many types available here. Just see which one suits you best. And if you want to use lookups, you could. So if you choose the type to, I believe, lookup or ID, let's see which one. Yeah, if you choose the type to lookup, you can pass here things. For example, you're only accepting parameters from my contact. We're not going to be doing it just yet. For now, we're going to use text just so we can pass strings around. It could be booleans, it could be decimals, whatever the case might be. We're not going to be passing any schemas, and we can specify that it's required. If it's required, then in the UI, once we use the standard UI, you will have that red asterisk telling you that you have to fill in that value before you can move on. So this is the only thing that we're going to be filling in. Everything else just leave unchecked. That's going to be fine. Now, the next parameter we want to create is the output parameter. So in this case, we're going to create out text, and let's say output text. And again, the type is going to be text, and it's not going to be required, but we can say it's a resulting type. Now, this checkbox might be a little bit confusing. It certainly confused me the first time I worked with this. And the idea here is that this internal execute, or actually not the method, but the user task itself is meant to be used when you need to execute a particular task. Usually in C#, when you execute a task, you return something. So in this case, we are asking, what are you returning? And unfortunately, we can only provide here only the basic types, like text, strings, etc. However, if you want to return something a little bit more complex, maybe your own custom composite object, you can certainly do that. And the resulting type is kind of optional. So you may check it, you don't have to check it. So it's really up to you. It's not going to affect you significantly. Okay, well, let's save this thing. Now, saving the item is not going to immediately create it for consumption. It's not going to be available to be consumed just yet. Now, why is that? Well, when we created the task for the first time, we got this template to work with, but we haven't really compiled our system at all. And our system really doesn't have much knowledge about this code. It doesn't know how to deal with this. It's not included in the final build. So once the saving takes place, it takes a little longer than expected, but once this saving takes place, we shall be able to click publish button, at which point publishing will take place, and that's simply a compilation. Now, I said that we're gonna be developing our code here inside Clio, but before we get to Clio, we need to do a few things on the user task first. Let's close this, and we'll keep this in mind, but for now, let's close this. Let's go back in the big Visual Studio, and let's open a large configuration project. So I'm gonna open a project or a solution. I'm gonna go back to Terasoft configuration folder, and in here, you see that there is a Terasoft.configuration solution. Now, this solution is the entire app. So this is what makes the product different from one to the other. So one Terasoft configuration will include packages for things in sales, in marketing, things of that nature. The other ones will only have studio components, and there is a core. So we have a core, and then we have Terasoft configuration. Let me show you maybe a little too early. So it's a little too early. We're going to get to that slide I have in mind for you. But what I'm interested in showing you is what happens here in SRC folder. You remember we clicked on this button. We clicked on the button to download packages to file system, and this is what we've downloaded. So we've downloaded all the CS classes here, so we can actually go click into every single class and we can look for things. Now, what we're going to be looking here is, since we don't know and we're learning it for the first time, let's find somewhere in Visual Studio the text that we inputted into our user task. For some reason, it's taking way too long to save. So what did we input here? We are probably going to be looking for something called in text. So let's see if we can find this element here. So in text. And if we don't find it, that's simply because this process for some reason didn't produce the intended results. So let's do one more time. Parameters. Let's click in text and in input text, type text, and let's create it, and let's add another one, and we're going to call it out text, output text, and it's going to be of a type text as well. Let's create it. Let's publish this. Record saved successfully. I could see this little thing for me here. So let's go back into Visual Studio and let's give it another search. I believe I called it in lower IN. Okay, so in text, I see that something is happening here. I see that the file that it's finding is inside business logic schema.accelerate custom process elements.ces. And it sounds reasonable. I mean, business logic schema is what we've created. So here's my business logic, and I am creating schema here. And that actually makes perfect sense. You can click on the pencil to take a look at more details here if you really needed to. But what's important here is this. The package that you're storing it, accelerate custom process element, which you'll be able to reference right here. And then the business logic is the name of your code, and schema is just kind of a name added there. So let's go inside this file, and let's take a look what's going on here. So you've got some methods here. You've got some constructors here, and you shouldn't really touch those. You've got properties, you shouldn't touch those, and these are the properties that are passed to us when we create things in the designer. So you could see that you've got in text, their virtual properties of a type string. And then you've got in this, in here, you've got a method defined. So write data, and we're going to be using this to work with the events. But the one that you're interested in is going to be, where's my method? Actually, I'm sorry. I think let me find this. Business logic schema. I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. I'm looking for my protected method. Maybe it didn't create it for me. So let's search for this guy. We're looking, let's say, for this class. Let's just look for this class, so we don't have to navigate and search by hand. All right, so that's the one that I wanna. That's the one that just not seeing internal execute for some reason. That's not right. Okay, let's do a quick download package to file system here. Maybe it's going to update itself. Maybe my Visual Studio is kind of stuck somewhere. No, still can't find it. Okay, well, we'll get there. If we can't open it in Visual Studio, we don't see it right away, that's okay. We can use this code. And what we want to do is we want to say that we have a parameter output text, out text. So let's just go and update it. So out underscore text is equal to in underscore text, plus we can add something here. We can add some word, let's say updated, and hopefully I can write it without making a mistake. Okay, so let's save this element. As soon as we save it, record successfully saved, fantastic. And what we need to do now is we need to publish it. Now, publishing, you could see it calls saving one more time, so you don't need to separately save things and then publishing things. You need to just click on a publish. So now what we can do is we can actually search for the string, and hopefully Visual Studio will find it for us. So let's go out text space equals something. Hopefully we can find it. No, unless I've opened the wrong. Unless I've opened the wrong file, I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it. Anyway, let's go to now. Let's go to now business processes, and let's see if we can somehow utilize this task to inside our business processes. So we're going to go jump back to Studio. We're going to go to Process Library, and we're going to create a new process, and we're going to call it custom process element, example. And in here, what we're interested in is we're interested in this user task. Let's just drag the user task here, and let's look for business, my custom business logic. Okay, so my custom business logic, that's the description, or that's the title that we gave it. And in here, you see that you have input text. So we can say hello, and we're expecting some sort of an output. Now, how do we see this output? Well, the easiest way to see the output is to probably use the auto-generated page or pre-configured page. In my case, I'm just going to use this auto-generated page. Inside the page, let's go and say that this is going to be a result. That's going to be my title. I'm going to call this page also result. I'm going to give it a quick button so we can navigate away or click on the cancel. And I'm going to give one page element, the type text, and we're going to say output text. You can call it anything you want. It doesn't matter. What would really matter is the code. If you want to be nicer to developers who are going to come after you, make sure that you name your things appropriately. In this case, I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to save it. Okay, so now I've got one output text label on the page, and I got one button. So let's configure this element. What we're going to do is we're going to grab process parameter, and from my business logic, I'm going to take output text, select it, and output it in this item. I then want to configure this flow, for example, to be a conditional flow and say that I would like to go on OK here, and then I can go, let's say, towards the exit on anything that is not OK. So that would be if you click cancel, and we can change it to a default flow. Okay, let's save this element, or let's save this custom process example. Let's check the parameters where we're saving it. So we could see that we're saving it in the package that we designated as our current package. Now, the process name is not something that you want. You probably want to change name here. So let's call it process custom process element example. Let it be our process name, and let's save this thing. Now, before we run this, I want to do one more thing. Let's go to process library and let's look at the properties. And inside the properties, I want to make sure that I enable tracing. I mean, we're in development environment here, and I would really want to make sure that if I do get any errors, that I am able to see what they are rather than them just simply disappearing on me. So let's save this element. Let's close it. And what I want to do now is I want to run this element. When I run the element, hello, updated. So obviously we have a bit of a spelling mistake here. We need to put a space between us. But at the end of the day, you should understand that we are now able to take a user task and show it on a business process here, which is great. So how do we terminate this process? We just simply click OK. This notification bar, you could see that it works as expected. You're still getting these result page items, so that's perfect. And we can click OK. Now let's go into process log and let's inspect the way this whole thing ran. So I see that I run custom process element, no surprises there. I see that this process is located inside this package, a run by supervisor, and we have achieved status completed. If I open the execution diagram for this element, I will also be able to see that I have launched this item at least once, and I have achieved this element once, and this item is not showing us that it has started or that it had finished, and that's kind of not very expected behavior, but once we convert it to a normal element, that will also give us an indicator here. Okay, so we can clearly see that we have taken the right path, and everything seemed to have worked just fine for us. Okay, so that works. Now, the next order of business is to convert this thing into our process element. Before we do that, though, let's really quickly talk about why would I want to build this? Why would I want to do this? And what are the good instances to build your user task when you should use perhaps another element called script task, and what are the advantages? So what you can see here is that I have my custom business logic, and what I could have done is I could have simply taken perhaps a formula element. Inside the formula element, I could have done the same calculation that I did inside my business logic, and then the result of this formula element I could have fed straight into here. So what's the advantage of, sorry, not the formula, I meant the script task. Script task also allows me to run some C# code. So I could have done something like this .set and set the parameter value to something and then feed it into this element. Now, it's true that the user task and the script task, they're very common, or they're very similar in the way we approach things, but the user task provides us a couple of advantages. First, we don't need to fiddle with the code here. We simply feed the parameters, the ones that we defined in our schema, and there's nothing else we can put into this element. In script task though, the whole code is open to you. So if, for example, you've got a business analyst who's savvy and he wants to look into something, he comes here, he accidentally removes something, and the whole element will break. So that's not a good approach. It's a good approach for tasks that are one-off, for tasks that no one will see, no one will touch, or they're just for you for quick prototyping. But if you want to put it out in the wild and you want to make sure that people are using it, it's a lot easier and a lot less error-prone to use this element than to use this element. Now, what's the other advantage? The other advantage is that by having modified my script or my user task once, I save my business process. I don't require compilation. My process remains as an interpreted process. As soon as I introduce this task, this component needs to be recompiled within the business process. Therefore, I have to sit and wait for this thing to be recompiled, and then like you don't want to do that. So you can't really deploy a new instance of this logic in the business process in production, because that would require recompilation, which is probably not a good thing. Okay, so those would be a couple of basic options why you would want to build, for example, a user task compared to a script task. Now, the script task is also something that you can use in event subprocesses. Now, an event subprocess, and actually, before we go to event subprocesses, let me just check if I have any questions here. Okay, so I see that I've already explained it. Okay, perfect. So I've already answered the question before I even read it. Okay, great. So where else can I use this task? Well, you can use this task also inside an event subprocess. Now, some of you who have been developing know that there is an element called entity event layer, and that's the layer on the C# that allows us to tap into a pipeline or tap into an element of saving the record, updating records, and doing things of that nature. Well, the same thing happens in the event subprocess. Let's quickly jump into an admin part, and let's say that we want to create, let's say, a replacing object. And I'm just going to grab a contact, for example. So let it be contact. Actually, I can do it here. I'm going to say that I'm going to be replacing a contact page, not a page, the whole object. Now, the system is going to say, are you sure? I'm going to say yes. Okay, so once that is done, what I'm interested in is looking at what's happening here in the events. I'm not going to be adding any columns. I just want to jump into an event. Let's say I would like to do something before records are being added. So we're going to have this message, and we're going to save this element first time, and then we're going to open process. Now, when you open an event subprocess, you're able to tap into all these events, and there's a lot of them. Something that is happening on add, something that is happening on saving and updating, deleting, loading, and even you have something called for validation. So you've got a special pipeline for validation. So there's a lot of events that you can tap into. Now, in here, if you want to call something, you would normally start off by saying that you're starting with event subprocess. Inside the subprocess, you've got the message, which is a starting signal, essentially, for our message. The message gets automatically generated for us right here. All we have to do is we have to pass it here. Now, things that are happening inside this event subprocess is what's going to be happening on this event, on before record adding. Before record adding means that you've got a pipeline where you save the record and it goes into various stages. So first we might be modifying some values after you click on the save, then we might be validating, then we're actually saving, and then something is happening after the things have saved. So what we want to do now is we want to see if those tasks are available to us. And you could see that you've got a user task here as well as a script task. Now, if we use a script task here, in here, and we also use a script task here, now you're duplicating your code. Now, if you need to make any changes, you have to make sure you come here, you come there, 2 places, so that's not a good approach. That's where this user task comes to help. What you can do here is, let's look for your business logic, and you can input your business logic right here, and you can do something about this event that you're saving. So now you can use one place or one element in the code to tap into event subprocess or just a regular business process. So that's kind of an additional benefit to using your user task. Now, I'm not going to be saving this element. I don't want to be saving anything in the context. So let me just go and delete that. I really don't want it. Don't want it to affect the system. And let's move on with our work here. So the next thing that I want to do with my business logic is I want to convert this. So I want to convert this thing into what's essentially going to be a business process element. So I don't want it to be a user task. I want it to make it a little bit more personal, a little bit more, I'll put a space here, a little bit more geared towards a final user. So what we can do is we can go here in the pencil and we can override some properties here. So let's first override this property. So the color, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this color will affect the color of this panel. So now it's kind of grayish and I don't like this grayish. I want it to stand out. So I'm going to use it as black. So I'm going to give it all zeros. Now you've got a couple of images. So you've got small vector image, large vector image, and a title vector image. And also you see that there is a small vector image for DCM. Once you acquire the skill necessary to convert it into a regular business process, you can move on and create them for DCM processes. So the opportunities are endless here. And you can add more descriptions, edit page, etc., etc. So let's make sure that we do that. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to provide a small vector image. Now the question is, what is the small vector, what is the large vector, and what is the title? If you look at the item here and you just bring up your console and you inspect some of the properties, you will see that this is an image called, I believe, title. And so you could see something in the title that says title. Then there is another one that for this guy, and this is going to be, I believe, small. No, this is a large image. We just have to look inside user task large. And then there is this element that we can find for user task. And this is a user task small. So we've got small image, large image, and a title. Let's give it a size. And if you need to know what the dimensions are, just follow this SVG file and take a look at what the required dimensions are. Okay, so we're gonna give it a title. So let's give it a title. And I believe I have title here. So let me see, I've prepared something. I have a small image. So I've got title 42 by 42. I've got a large image. Let's give it a 150 by 150. And I got a small image. Where's my small? 24 by 24. Okay, and I'm going to apply this. Now, I also need to make sure that if I am converting something into a user element, I need to make sure that I have this edit page. Now, let's do one step at a time. So if I click on apply and I click on publish, and once that thing publishes, let me just close all this stuff. Once it publishes, I want to see if those picture files actually had any effect whatsoever. Let me review if I have any questions for now. So the question is, what are the performance differences between these methods compared to using a non-C# code elements only? What we're doing here is we're building an element that will become available to you in this business process element. So there is really no comparison at this point because we're targeting at different objectives. But if you wanted to compare, let's say, doing something with low code versus doing it with C#, there are instances where there is no advantage to deploying code whatsoever. Reading data, adding data, modifying data, for example, these are highly optimized elements that work great. They work really fast. They've been tested a million times. There is absolutely no reason to complement those elements with the C# code where absolutely necessary and when no other element can be used or as a substitute. And I just realized I have this, so let me allow it. Okay, hopefully that answers. So performance, maybe a little bit, but it shouldn't be significant. Properly designed business process will run pretty much as fast as just regular CS stuff. Okay, let's go back into our process library. Let's take a look at the process element example. And now I see that nothing has changed here. And let's see if I can find this user task, if it's going to be any different. Let's call the business logic, and nothing is really changing. So all the pictures that we have done, they haven't affected anything. They are still the same color, no pictures, nothing. So how do we go about it? And just give me a second. We're gonna have to execute some command. I'm just gonna find my cheat sheet here. And in my cheat sheet, we need to convert this. And the conversion step is fairly straightforward. However, I keep forgetting one thing. Just give me a second. Excuse me. Oh, where are you? Okay, so what we will need to do is we will need to launch a SQL or something that can execute SQL commands. Now, the reason we need to launch this thing is because we need to convert this user task into something else. Now, as the user, we'll never see that because we will provide data binding. But for now, in the development mode, we unfortunately have to do this. So let's go into this database. That's the one that we're working with. And let's use a statement here. And here's going to be my statement. So I am going to be inserting into this table, and I'm going to be taking these two values. So from sys schema s, where name is s. So let's take a look at what this thing actually is. So what you'll find in this table is basically what you'll find in this table is a list of all user tasks that already exist. Now we can, for simplicity, let's do this. Let's order by, I believe there was a created on, and let's do it descending order so that our element is on top. So you can see that there is a custom process element example here. And what the SQL is doing is actually inserting this thing. So there is a caption, and we also want a name, I believe. Let's get a name from it. I think that's what we need. Oops. All right, so here's the element that the name of our custom process element example. So here's my business logic. Perfect. So that's the element that I want to be inserting into this table. So let's just update this this item, and let's execute this statement. Okay, so one row affected, and I'll keep the SQL minimized for later, for when we may need to come back here. And now let's go back into our business process after we have executed, and let's take a look at what's going on here. Now we see that we have my custom business logic. So this guy works, but for some reason, this picture didn't pick. So we need to provide a different picture, or we need to work with a slightly different picture. So let's remind ourselves what picture that is, so we can go ahead and actually fix this element. So I'm going to take a picker. I'm going to take a look at this guy, and it's telling me that it's a small SVG image. All right, so let's go back here. Let's go into properties, and we need to update a small image. And for some reason, this guy didn't save. Not sure if I didn't click here. Let's give it a small image. Okay, let's apply this and let's publish it one more time. All right, let me check if I have any additional questions. No, we're good for now. Okay, so everything is published. Let's do this trick one more time. Let's discard all the changes, and maybe we need to reload this page. Now, on occasion, what you will see is that you're kind of going to get stuck here with this element. So let me open this business logic one more time just to make sure that I did save everything. Yeah, so it looks like we're in okay shape here. And if you do get stuck in these positions and you know that you've done it, it's probably something to do with caching, probably something to maybe even do with Redis, maybe something did not clear, maybe we're not refreshing stuff. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to clear my Redis database, and just to make things a little bit easier. And while I'm at it, I'm going to show you how you can do it yourself with the help of Clio. So here I'm back in the PowerShell, and let's use Clio command called apps. The Clio apps will give me a list of files that are currently referring to the environment that I have created. So I have 3 files here. So one environment is dev, the other one is dev1, the other one is dev2. Dev1 happens to be the one that we're working with, so it's 7090. And my 7090 is also configured to be my active key environment, which means that I can do this, Clio flush db. And this will go and flush my Redis database. Now you're not seeing anything here, but what's actually happened is we flushed the Redis database. So as soon as I go in this environment anywhere and I'm trying to, you see, it's telling me insufficient rights. And that's because I've deleted all cookies, I've deleted all sessions, I've deleted pretty much everything there. The next command that I wanted to show you is Clio Restart. Now, instead of flush db, we can do Clio Restart. Now, Clio Restart will do a similar thing, but you could see my site is restarting. Now, there's nothing I can do right now. Application reloading, please wait. Now, this is happening not because I have certain tricks with my file system. This will happen out in the cloud as well. If you issue these commands to a cloud instance of your environment, it will work. So you can take, and I don't encourage you to take your production environment, but if you're stuck somewhere in production, you want to clear it, restart it, then by all means, go ahead and do that. If you want to provide a different environment, for example, I have 3, you could see dev1, dev2, I can just simply specify -e for the environment and specify that I'd like to restart this thing or whatever it is that I want to restart. Now, some environments you can mark as safe in your Clio file. By the way, in Visual Studio, it's very convenient when you have this file open, when you launch the Clio command, it's going to tell you where the files are located. So if you hold Shift and click on it, the file will open up automatically for you. Now, we're talking about this dev environment. So if I say safe to true, and I suggest you do that for your production environments, let's clear the command line. And let's do the same thing for Clio Restart. Now, because I have marked my environment as safe, the system or Clio will ask me every time I want to do something potentially disrupting to the customer experience, it's going to ask me if I'm really sure I want to do that. And I'm going to say no, and the operation will be canceled. So I would recommend turning the safe key on or to true for all your production environments and to false for your development environments. Okay, so now that we have done this, let's go quickly jump into process library. Hopefully we will get our picture there. If not, I'll have to play with another picture and take a look at the dimensions, but I thought it was the right one. No, still didn't get it. Okay, so I'm gonna play with the picture. Maybe it needs a slightly different picture. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is I want to see how I can use this element. And, by the way, this is no longer applicable. We can no longer use it. So let's change that. Let's get rid of this guy. And let's go here and let's use my custom process element, and let's do the same thing. So now what we're seeing is that you've got this business logic, but you've got no place to put your code. Now that's a bit of a problem because we've lost the ability to put those input and output parameters. Now the output parameters should still be available to us. If we go here in the process parameter and we find this business logic, we can still see it. However, the input parameter is missing. And if I were to save it, the system, no, it's not complaining, but it should have, oh, we did make it required. So that's why it's not complaining. Well, we need to do something about this edit page. Well, it turns out that the edit page needs to be configured. So let's go back into our business project process element and let's use a default parameter for it. So in here, and in my properties, I will use user task element properties edit page. So parameter edit page, user task element property, that's the one I want to use. Okay, and then let's see if we can play with the small image. Let's give it, I don't know, let's give it this guy. Hopefully it feels better about it. And let's apply this and let's save it and publish. Okay, so what we have done is we told the system to use task element property page. Now this property page is something that you can totally override with your own JavaScript. And again, that's probably beyond the scope of this class or beyond the scope of this training or talk, but you can change this edit page to be whatever you want. So you can be calling and tapping into external services. You could be doing some sophisticated validations. You could be asking intelligent questions. Whatever you can do with JavaScript, you can do for those pages. This page that we just modified, that's the one that's responsible for this part. And every element of business process will have this edit page. We call them property pages. Okay, so let's close this. Let's close this as well. And let's refresh our page just for good measure. I forgot, I didn't clear the cache on this element. So let me just do that too. I'll do empty cache and hard reload. And then we're gonna go back into our process element. I see the password question. So, so Julie is asking, are those passwords in clear text dangerous? Well, yes, they are. They are dangerous in the way that if they get leaked, then obviously that's your production environment. Chances are what you're doing here is you're working with your development pre-production environments, and those aren't really sensitive. I mean, for my particular application, I have environment configured that I am only talking to my local machines. I have no secrets here whatsoever. If I am using a production environment, I would have a command line where I would do it inline, my username, my password. I wouldn't store it on the disk. If you need to bump up your security, then by all means, you can just simply, instead of calling Clio do something -e, you can provide a full path, you can provide a full password, full username. So you could do that, but normally you just use it to move things around on your dev box, and that shouldn't be a problem for you. You can always do piping, so you can put it in the secure vault. And if you know how to do piping in PowerShell or in Bash, if you're on Linux, you can always do that. Okay, so let's go back to our custom process element example. Hopefully I will be able to get the picture going. Yeah, there's my picture, great. So the picture needs to be perhaps a little bit smaller. All right, but the interesting part is what's happening now here. So okay, so now we got this page back. Now we can use my input thing. So let's give it a page space or no space. I don't remember if we added the space. Let's save this element and let's run this business process. Now we still see the same thing. We see that our element works as before, nothing has changed, but what we have effectively done is we've created a custom business process element that now when you're looking at the system, if you name it accordingly, obviously, my element, you can go ahead and do things about it. You can also do conditional flows here. So that's your default behavior that has nothing to do with the business process element itself. That's what happens after the element. So you can do conditional flow and you can say if the output task or the output text is a particular value, then go here or go in some other flows, etc., etc. So that's great. But now the next thing is, what if I want to call something external to it? So it's great that I can have this, but I really don't want to be using and writing the logic in here in my schema because I find it difficult or I find it inconvenient. So what can I do about it? Well, let's take this text and let's hope that the Visual Studio actually, I'm not going to save anything. I'm going to open it one more time. I think I opened the wrong project. So let's open a project or a solution. And let's go, yes, we're _1, web app, configuration. Let's open this solution, let it load. And inside the PKG, what you will see is that you've got this custom process element, you've got the schemas, you've got the business logic, and here's your file. So let's open this file. Let's see what's going on here. Protect it. Here's my text now. So previously, or previous to 7.17, this item wouldn't exist. This item would be created in auto-generated folder by metadata. Now you actually have a nice little class that encapsulates this logic for you. So what we can do in this class now is we can call external things. So what kind of external things do I want to call? Well, let's now move on to implementation of our Clio project. So I'm going to minimize this a little bit. Actually, I'm going to move it on the other side. And I'm going to open this Clio package of ours. So let's go here. Let's go to the solution. And what I want to do is I want from here, from this element, call something that I'm going to implement here. So for that, I've got a slide for us. So just bear with me, a little bit of PowerPoint coming up. So what we have here is the typical configuration or typical problem that people will experience. So this is the big solution where we have our custom process element, otherwise known Terasoft configuration. Terasoft configuration is where you have business process runtime, is where you have many other things implemented where all your packages go. But then on the other side, you've got this Clio package that you can quickly compile, quickly add some external libraries, and you want them to interact between each other. So how do you do that? Well, they can talk to each other directly. They have no idea of each other's presence. Clio and Terasoft configuration, they kind of live on the same level. They have no idea that one exists. And even if they did, even if you can somehow through reflection, figure out that it's there, we don't really have anything common, anything defined between them. So calling things from one into another would be difficult. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is to use what's common to us, and that's going to be Terasoft Core. Terasoft Core is as we refer to, a platform. Now, the platform gives us the tools to, through class factories, to call things. And this way, we can, from Clio project, we can go to Terasoft Core and say, hey, Terasoft Core, give me something from here, or this thing, Terasoft configuration, or in our instance, a runtime of business process, when necessary, can come to Terasoft Core and say, hey, give me implementation of something. So what we're essentially going to have here is something like this. Inside our Clio, we're going to add my logic, and we're going to define an interface. And in here, on Terasoft configuration, in the runtime, we're just simply going to consume a class that provides this interface. We're going to get an instance of this interface in this way, just by calling Terasoft factories get class, or class factory.get, provide the instance of this interface, and we're off to the races. Now, the only piece that is missing is, how do we share these interfaces? Well, that's what we're going to do next. So let's go back to our Clio. Inside Clio, the first thing that we want to do is, let's go to CS, and I'll nuke this empty CS. We don't really need it. And let's go ahead and add a simple class. Before we do that though, let me see if I can copy some text. And just give me a second. I've got an example for us. So we don't have to type, and I see we might be a little bit short on time, so I don't want to be wasting your time here. Right. Files, CS, demo, business logic. All right, so let me do it step by step. So in here, let's add a class. We're going to call it business logic. So my class is going to be called demo business logic. Okay, now that I've created my class and I have a lot of regions already defined in my template, let's make this class public right away so that we don't run into any issues here. And I'm going to get rid of these files for now for my namespace. Okay, so what I want to do here is I want to add a couple of methods. Let me just grab some methods here. And we can add another method on top, and that's going to be add numbers. Add numbers. Okay, so all we're essentially doing here is we're providing a very simple business logic where we're adding numbers, subtracting, multiplying them, and dividing them. Okay, let's clean up our usings. Let's save this thing and let's build it. So there we go. We've built, now our solution is built, and you could appreciate how much faster it is compared to building a compile or compiling the whole application as we did before. Now, sometimes what you might get is you might get an error list here. An error list will tell you that something about an empty CS, so you just need to go on the CS project file, depending on the Visual Studio configuration, and tweak a little bit, but usually it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so how do we, I said that we're going to be doing something with the interfaces. So to do something with the interfaces, we're going to add another project here. So we're going to add another new project, and we're going to call it the same thing as we called this one. So let me just copy this name so it's faster, and we're going to add new project, and it's going to be a .NET framework. Where's my .NET class library? Standard. I want normal framework. Class, not standard. Right. I want regular framework. I can get away with the standard, but in this case, why not use just a full framework? You can use it, but that's all right. So what I want to do is now I want to give it a name, and I'm going to call it interfaces. You can call it API, you can do whatever you want, but essentially it's putting it in the same folder. Now let's delete this class. What we want to do here is we want to add an interface. So let's find interface, and we're going to call it a demo business logic. So demo business logic, demo business logic. And in here, what we're going to do is, let's just do this trick. So we're going to come here, and we're going to say that from here, I'd like to extract my interface. I'll put it in demo business logic CS file. There it is. And I'm not going to keep it. I'm just simply too lazy to type. So I'm going to copy it. I'm going to type it here. Okay. And this demo business logic is great. This I don't need. And let's make sure that we delete this one. So we don't really need it. Okay. So as soon as I do that, there is a problem here. The problem here is because, well, this demo business logic doesn't exist here. So let's bring in a using. Okay, what happened here? And this thing needs to be public. And come on. What's going on? Demo business logic could not be found. Okay, so we've got to take a dependency. So let's add a reference to this to the interfaces package. And now that we do that, we should be able to bring in the using for this interfaces. And now our demo business logic is built. Okay, perfect. So now that I have my demo business logic, the next thing is, how do I tell Terasoft configuration about it? So how do I load this whole thing into the system? This will not work yet. So what I need to do is I need to bring in some common implementation or common things between Terasoft configuration and this Clio package. Now it turns out that you have here what's called in the Nougat Packages. So if you're going to go back to, not back, but if you're going to go to your Nougat Packages, you can see that in the package that was created by Clio here, there's a lot of references already to Terasoft. And it's provided to you by this Nougat package, Terasoft Creatio SDK, or Creatio SDK. Now, the version that is currently installed is 7.5.2.501. So that's something that's been around for quite some time. And what you want to do is you probably want to match it to the version of the instance that you're running on. So let's take a look at the version of our, where's our application? Here's our application. And the easiest way to see a version is to kind of look here in the corner. So you'll see it's 7.17.21.47. So let's go back here, 21.47, and 48 is probably a core. Okay, so we've got this thing. Let's update this. Let's agree to licensing. If you have an older version of this application, then what you can do is you can just simply choose the version that you want. There's a lot of versions provided. You see 17.16.4 all the way down to 15.2. So something that is almost a half a year, or no more, a year and a half old, maybe even longer. So you can go back and find the version that is relevant to you. Okay, so now that we've updated the system and we've got another updates, I don't want to update to 48 because 48 is not what I want. Okay, let's build this application. It's still built, fantastic. But now the last thing that we need to do is we need to decorate our class with what's called a default binding, and that's going to be used for dependencies. So default binding, and default binding doesn't exist yet, but it does exist in core factories. So let's bring the using for core factories, and core binding takes one type of, and here we have to pass demo business logic. Okay, so we've passed it. So we literally created our class, gave it an interface, and said, use it. So that's how we're doing our dependency injection. What we can do now is we can build this thing Okay, everything is built. And now let's go back into our elements here. And I'm gonna go back into my admin page. And what I need to do in my program here is I unfortunately need to import my interface. Now, the good thing is that I need to import interface only once, because once we agree on the interfaces between the Clio and the configuration, there is no need to touch us. The rest we're touching is simply, implementation. So let's make sure that we can import that. So we're gonna go into import, and we're gonna go into our application, and inside of our application, let's go web app, configuration, PKG. Let's find the interfaces folder, and let's go in the bin. And we haven't built anything for release yet, so we're gonna take a debug, and let's just take this thing. All right. As soon as you do this, the next step that you have to make sure you do is that you compile. Without having compiled this, this thing, it's not gonna work. There's also another trick that you may need to do, but let me do step by step. So the compilation will make sure that now Terasoft configuration package is aware of this particular library. The other thing that you may want to do is you may want to go and make sure that you download packages to file system. That will make sure that your package contains this particular library. Now let's quickly review what's happening here in what's going on. Oh, too delayed. Okay, so let's take a look what's happening here inside our directory. So we're going to go back in the web app while we're compiling, and into PKG and into our element. And inside our element, what we will see now is that the placeholder, that the assemblies folder is still empty. Now, our Terasoft configuration may have this assembly, but our file or our package does not. Now, if our package does not have this assembly, that means that if we were to move our package from place to place, we would be missing this key ingredient. So actions, download package to file system, and now we should be able to see that there's going to be an assembly, and eventually, hopefully, it's going to come here. So let's just give it a moment. There's my assembly, and inside the assembly, you're going to get a descriptor for this assembly, and you're actually going to get this interface. At this point, what you can do is you can just simply swap this file. You don't need to come here and do this whole download, upload, but I guess it's a little bit more intuitive for people to do this. If you're doing a file swapping directly in the file system, make sure you update your descriptor and bump up the UTC time modified. This time modified will tell system whether or not the file has changed. So when we're looking, where's the studio? Didn't open. Where is it opening? I lost my studio. There. So when we're looking, come on, at the descriptor for our DLL, here's the file name, here's the version and all that other necessary information, but there is this modified on UTC. So if you're doing a file swap, just swap this line, bump it up by a second. So just like this, right? And then the system will kind of clue in that, okay, something has changed. Let's go and fix it. Let's go and get a new version. Okay, so we did all this stuff, all this work. So why did we do this? Well, the reason we did this is because what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and call them. So we have add number, subtract, multiply, and we did this part. So this whole part is already completed. Now we want to do this part. So we want to call this function somehow. So let's go ahead and do that. For that, I'm going to use the Terasoft configuration package inside our business logic right here. And in here, I want to do the same thing. I want to say Terasoft Core factories, class factories get, and I'm going to provide what is it that I want to get, right? And I'm going to say that it's going to be a var. Business logic is going to be this. Now, what is it that I'm asking it to get? Well, I want demo business logic. And look, it already knows that it needs to bring it from this namespace. So let's take this. Okay, so now that we've gotten this, and the Visual Studio is going to put the using for us right on top, which is great. And what I can do now is, let's for simplicity convert it to the explicit definition. And now my BL can do things. So what can BL do? Let's look at the methods. It can add numbers, it can divide numbers, it can do whatever we want. So let's do this. BL add numbers, and we're going to add numbers, and it needs to int, right? So let's give it a 10 and 10, or it's going to be 20. Or what we can do is we can do, let's do int dot parse, and let's parse in text. And let's make sure that it's an int, and we're going to essentially do this plus, not plus, sorry, like that. So we're going to add the input text twice, and this add numbers gives me an int. So let's do int result equals to this thing, and what we want is we want to output it, right? And so let's make sure that we output this thing. So we're going to go output text is equal to what is it, result, and let's format it to a number. Okay, so here's my output. What I want to do now is I want to get rid of this line. So let's remove it and let's clean it up. Okay, so normally at this point, what you would do is you would simply save this item and you would go back into the system. You would open your business logic, make sure it's there. And that was kind of the old approach. You come here, you look, okay, well, yeah, my code is here, and then you would hit on publish. Now, if you're working with Clio, and if you're working with anything that supports external tools, so like Writer or Visual Studio, then you can add external commands. In Visual Studio, you can go to external tools and configure your commands. I've configured my commands to do this. Restart my dev, and you could see that I am referencing my Clio, and I'm providing the environment that I want. I can flush Redis database. I can open dev just by clicking a button. But what I can also do is I can build this workspace. So let me just do exactly that. I'm going to click on this build workspace button, and it's telling me that I have a problem. So not everything can be done immediately with Clio. One thing that you may need to know, that you may need to do with Clio is to get access to all its external features, is to make sure that you install Clio Gate. Clio install Gate. Clio install Gate installs a package in the system. It does it all automatically, pulls it from a repository, from our repository that is publicly available. So I'm not tricking you in any way. You can do Clio Gate on your machine, and it's installing this package just like you would install any other package, and that will bring us to the deployment model later. You could see that the last step is that it's compiling the application, or it's compiling configuration right now. Now, when this thing is going to be done, and it might take a little bit to actually install it because we're going through compilation. So technically, once this thing is installed, we don't need to recompile anything. We can just simply call. But I want to show you how, after having done this, you can build your workspace straight from Visual Studio without ever leaving the Visual Studio experience. So let's give it a few more moments. And I'll review if we have any questions. How can we handle try catch? It's a tough one. You definitely don't want to have any exceptions in your configuration. You probably want to do try catch where you implement your logic. I mean, some exceptions are good. Some exceptions are good. Some exceptions are bad. I mean, if you're expecting an exception, for example, I might get a transient exception when I'm calling external web service. how do I handle it? Well, I'll probably do a retry pattern. I'll try 2 or 3 times. I'll probably use a poly for that. If after 3 times I still fail, I probably need to let the system know that I have failed. So really, try-catch handling is going to be your specific implementation. There is no best practice. I mean, exceptions are bad as far as the user concerned, but at some point you still have to throw them, because otherwise it's going to be so silent that you're not even going to know that the whole system is broken. All right, in any event, let's now try to hit this button, build workplace, now that the app in my studio has built. So now you could see that I've got a result telling me that I have built. Now, when you're working with the cloud, there is one known issue, and that has to do with the implementation of Clio. And it might tell you that it timed out if you're working with the cloud instance. Now, I haven't checked it on the latest release of 7.17, but in the previous releases, it would time out. I don't know if it has been fixed. The issue has been published. It's been admitted by the R&D team. So we're expecting a fix anytime. The process still continues. It works fine. It just, when you're working in the cloud, the connection will drop and Clio couldn't handle it. So just sit tight, kind of, in the last step. If you're going to compilation, you know that you've succeeded essentially. Excuse me. And now we're sitting here in the Visual Studio and we're waiting for when we're going to get done compiling. If we're going to switch to the UI, if we're going to go back to Accelerate to the main tab, you may see that it may not even load, or it might load but not completely. And so what you really want to do is you really want to make sure that you get this done in Visual Studio. Excuse me. Okay, now that you're done, let's try to go to our process right here. Excuse me. Okay, let's go to process library. Let's go to our element, and let's make sure that we change the input parameter. So it was page. Let's add it to, let's say 4, because that's kind of what we're expecting now. Let's save this. Now it's telling me that I can save it as a new version or a current version. That has to do with the fact that we have running instances. So a quick trick that I like to use is simply deactivate and reactivate the process. That will kill any running instances of this thing. Let's make sure that we're still running the right thing. So we've got the 4, we can save it. Excuse me. Let's run it. And now you could see that I'm getting my 8. So now what I'm doing, I am effectively calling everything straight from here. I'm adding these numbers. So let's prove that. Let's do this. Let's do a different method. So instead of returning a plus b, I want to now make a change. So a plus b, actually, what am I doing? A plus b, and let's do plus 1. Okay, that's what I want to do. Now let's put a breakpoint here. Let's attach to a running instance of the process. So we'll say W3 and search for this. Let's attach to it. Now it's our project, so the attachment should be fairly fast. Come on, pick it up. Oh, I didn't save the element, that's why. Okay, let me just save it. I need to rebuild. Now that I've built the logic, right? So I need to rebuild. I need to simply start dev restart so that it restarts the application. And now that I have restarted, I'm not sure what that is. Dev restart. It's a weird exception. Really strange. Okay, didn't expect that. Let's see if it's still working. It looks functional. Let's see if I can restart from here. So Clio Restart. Yeah, I don't know, maybe something with Visual Studio. Maybe I'm calling the wrong things here. Okay, so we've restarted this. And what I want to do is I want to attach to the running instance of this process. Let's attach. Hopefully it will pick up my breakpoint. It did. And let's now minimize this guy. Let's go here. Let's go here. Let's minimize all this stuff. And let's run this thing. As soon as I run it, you could see that I can immediately debug. I got my A, I got my B, and I'm about to return 9. So if I allow it to continue, there's my 9. So now there is no that long attached to process debug Terasoft configuration. It's too difficult. It's not complicated, but it's too massive. So you want to make things simpler. You want to modify. You want to make changes faster. You saw it took me 2 minutes to make the change to my implementation of an interface and basically provide a result. And obviously, you can provide anything from here. Now, if you want to do additional things, something that you haven't previously defined, then by all means, go ahead, create a new interface. In that case, you do need to provide the interface and upload it to the package. So now the last thing that we need to do is we need to actually build this package and provide it, let's say, for deployment. We can always use Clio for that. If we open up the Studio, let's roll it up. Let's clear it. Let's go back to our folder. Oops. So we're going to go, where is it? Init, root, accelerate, no, _1, Terasoft package. Okay, so I'm going to be sitting here, and you see that you've got the interfaces folder and you've got the elements. So the first thing what you can do is you can obviously get init, right? If you want to publish it somewhere. I will provide the code for this session later. It will be available on the GitHub for download. I will provide a link for you, so in case you're interested. But the only thing that I'm going to be publishing are these 2 folders, so the element and the interface, so you've got the whole package. But now, let's do this. So Clio, compress. And what I'm going to do is let me open this, my C drive real quick, and I'll see what's inside my PKG. So my PKG folder is empty. Let me grab this. And what I want to do is I want to prepare a zip file. So I'm going to say accelerate custom process element, and I'd like to output it into here / and let me copy this thing, and I will say GZ at the end. Hit enter, done, and you've got your GZ file. Now, Clio push, actually I forgot how the command goes. Push, let's take a look, I don't remember. Pull package, new package, install get item, push package, so install. So what we can do now is we can go to cd, c, pkg, there's my file. And what I can do here is Clio install accelerate and just get rid of this starting thing, -e, and provide the name of your environment, dev, prod, or whatever. And guess what? It's just going to push it onto the file system, or it's going to push it into the final environment. So this is kind of the workflow that you would follow to install things, to move things around. So that has nothing to do with obviously building your custom process element. But what we've achieved so far is we were able to create our process element, convert it from a user task to an element task, provide some pictures, even touched a little bit on the edit page, so how we can fix that. So now you can go and add elements to it. And most importantly, you saw how easy it is for us now to make changes to our code to already established interface. The code is completely decoupled, so if I make a boo-boo, that's not a big deal. It's not going to blow up the rest of the system, but I'm probably going to hear really, really quickly from my friend. So thank you very much for the source code for us. There's currently nothing there. I've just initialized a repository, but probably in the next day or so, I will commit final version of this element. All right, thank you.